Hi, I'm Scott Hanselman. This is another episode of Hanselminutes. Today I'm chatting with Johnny Marler. He's the lead Windows developer at Tuple. How are you, sir?
I am doing good. How are you doing?
Very well. Thanks for hanging out with me today. I was checking out Tuple at tuple.app, Tuple.app, as I always like to install whatever the new hotness is. And one of the things I think is common for developers, and hopefully it's not a weird thing to say, is I think to myself, what did they write this in? Like I've installed Claude and I've installed ChatGPT and I've installed Copilot, and it all feels like everyone's just doing web views. It's just like a web view. Here's a canvas. I'm going to do some HTML in a box. But Tuple is immediately, it's like, this is native. Someone wrote this like driving stick shift. Is
Yeah.
that a good guess?
Yeah, no, that's a good summary. I guess like normal apps, it kind of makes sense to use the web because they usually contain a lot of Chrome or UI, and
Mm-hmm.
Tuple's kind of the opposite. We actually intentionally try to avoid having a lot of Chrome or UI
Yeah,
in the way.
kind of hide out.
Yeah, it's not about connecting to your computer. It's more about connecting to other humans.
Mm.
And so if if you're optimizing for that, it's actually more important to get the system APIs correct. Like you want to be talking directly to your system because it knows the best way to transfer video over the network and audio. So that's what we're optimizing for. It's a little bit more of a, different use case than the typical app, I would say.
Now, Tuple works on Windows 10 and Windows 11, but also works on Mac and works on both Intel and Apple Silicon. A lot of people have abandoned Mac, Intel Silicon. Like, is it all the same code base and you just like pound define your way to glory?
Yeah, I wish. It did start out being written specifically for Mac OS,
Mm.
and they started to, before I came on, port it to Linux. And so at that point they started to take some of the common stuff and make an engine. So the engine's all C++, which is the common code base.
Mm-hmm.
Mac OS, which I'm not familiar with, I think there's a lot of Objective C in the Mac OS app, and there's Swift as well sprinkled in there. But yeah, they started before me adding Linux support, and they ended up using a Flatpak for that, um, which was the initial version. That is now no longer supported, and we're going a different direction for Linux now. But yeah, we pulled all the common parts into a C++ engine, which has been working well.
Oh, okay. So interesting. So you, as the lead Windows developer, consume the kind of upstream C++ engine. But doesn't that engine at some point, though, need to call syscalls? It needs to call Win32 APIs. It needs to call Mac APIs. Do you have a say into how that C++ looks, or do you stay on the outside shell on the Windows side?
That's a good question. So I would say our biggest core piece of code base is actually WebRTC. That's kind of like the backbone that the engine mostly interacts with. So WebRTC itself has tons of system level APIs, but when you start talking about like your UI or the application specific stuff, the platform specific stuff, now that's all outside of the engine, inside of what we would call the app layer.
Mm-hmm.
So
So this is a good opportunity to explain like what Tuple does, right? So this is a remote pair programming app. Is this meant for interviews, or is this meant for you and I to pair up on something?
yeah, it's meant for programmers, specifically tailored to like make working seamless and easy. And quick. So, like one of the things we found is it's sometimes hard to get pairing going. Like you got to message somebody, you might have to start a calendar invite. So with Tuple, it's just one click to call somebody to just get in that meeting, and there's shared control by default. So you don't have to like change some sort of setting to allow the other person to take over your screen or to draw on your screen. Everything's just enabled by default, and it's just usually one click to do almost anything. And Tuple also stays out of your way, so we're not, putting some sort of Chrome over that's covering your code. We by default make webcams small and kind of in the corner. So there's just a lot of like little things like that kind of make Tuple nice specifically for programmers. Along with like all the performance things we're doing, the fact that we're a native app, it's not hogging your CPU, so you can still compile your code while you're sharing your screen and pairing.
That's a great point. Like trying to use Zoom or Teams to pair program involves, like you said, a call or an appointment. You do the thing, you share the screen, you throw pixels across the wire, like however you choose to do it. Somebody's at 4K, somebody's at 1080p, and then you have to do the whole give control. Are you sure you want to give control? It's a whole dance. And when you get with someone who's a programmer who types really fast, that lag as they
Mm-hmm.
type, and then they wait for it to show up on your, in your environment, in your VS Code, is just torture. Like as good as Teams and Zoom are, there's a lag for typing, and it's
Yeah,
very
and that
uncomfortable.
matters a lot to developers. Pretty much everybody at Tuple is a developer, and so these are the sorts of things that we really pay attention to. That if there's any sort of lag and you're trying to type and code, it's not good. So that's something that we immediately flag and try to optimize out.
That's really interesting because you think about like screen sharing as a muggle, as a regular person. I think that if I asked my non-technical partner, she would say this is just like a solved problem. Like screen sharing is a thing. It's universal. But then you start thinking about things like Nvidia Cloud or Xbox gaming. They're trying to get that down to like nanoseconds, like not milliseconds, but nanoseconds. They want to make that as fast as possible. So screen sharing isn't a solved problem if you have a niche you want to fill, like this needs to work for gamers or this needs to work for coders. And it sounds like you've optimized for typing in an editor with more than one mouse and more than one keyboard.
Yeah, and it's definitely a selfish endeavor. When you are a programmer and you start writing tools for programmers, the big motivation is because you want a better tool. So that's one of the big appealing things about Tuple for me is I love writing developer tools. Stuff that makes your builds easier, your editor, things like that. It's my thing. So Tuple is a great fit for me, and it's fun to work on that sort of thing to make our lives easier.
Do you think that native Windows apps, which is something that you have a lot of experience in, is a dying art? Are there few
Oh
people
yeah,
that know how to do this well?
yeah. Anytime I've told people that we're doing native Windows, they give me their blessing. Like I'm sorry that you have to go through that pain, but I also think I have a bit of Stockholm syndrome. Right, I've been doing Windows for so long, it feels like that old friend that has some rough edges, but you learn to love them because you understand them and you're familiar with them. So I feel like I have a parasocial relationship with Raymond Chen from reading so much of his writing on the inner workings of Windows. And now I get like excited to do something interesting in Windows. So, one of the features that we have, like app fail, that was when I first started on Windows. I don't think I would have had any idea on how to implement that. But now that I've gotten so familiar, it's just like a fun challenge, a fun puzzle to solve. And I have all these niche tools and knowledge that helps me do something like that, which is fun.
So, App Veil that you just brought up is an app that keeps windows that you don't want to be shared from being shared. So, if I go right now and I share my screen in the web browser that we're talking in, or on Teams, or on Zoom, in the old days, it felt like they were basically just doing a screenshot 10, 15 frames a second, and then doing all of the diff work locally. But there's like basically screen sharing APIs now, right? Like do operating systems have noticed that people wanted to share their screens, that hitting print screen 20 times a second is not scalable, and we share that. So there a screen sharing API in Windows?
Yeah. So I guess a bit of the history. It initially started out, there's an API called GDI, and
Mm-hmm.
GDI was like like an abstract, nice, high level API for doing graphics,
Yeah.
and they had a screen
Graphics device
capture.
interface.
Yep, exactly. And Tuple actually started out mostly using GDI itself. Tuple's
Mm-hmm.
development has kind of followed alongside the history of Windows, where we've moved from the older technologies to the newer stuff. So now we're using like DirectX, Direct2D. The new screen capture API, there's a newer one that we haven't fully implemented yet, but there's a slightly older one, which they both share most of the code. We now capture the screen from the Windows compositor via graphics textures, so GPU textures. And so it's called DXGI, I think duplication something graphics. I don't remember the term, but yeah, now we get back a GPU texture, and There's an interesting story with this too, because now that AI is such a big part of so many people's jobs, I can say that because of AI, we actually have a more efficient screen capture implementation, specifically because with AI, I was actually able to write a shader that would keep the screen on the GPU and do the YUV conversion on the GPU. So I had to write like a custom shader for that, and that's not something that I'm super familiar with. So because of AI, I was able to like immediately ask it, "Hey, how would you write this shader?" And the thing that it gave me like kind of worked, like didn't really work that well, but it gave me that starting point so that I could actually get to the finish line in a reasonable amount of time. And so now all of our users have benefited because they're using less CPU to capture that screen and send it, eventually get it sent over the network.
Yeah. The rise of screen sharing goes beyond just like Zoom and COVID and Teams and everyone being remote. It's also things like the Xbox Game Bar, like Discord, like Twitch. And people used to go and call windows.graphics.capture, which is effectively like hitting print screen really fast.
Yeah.
And then DirectX, the interface for that most games use, and the DXGI that you keep saying, that DirectX graphics infrastructure,
Mm.
basically lets you see how many graphics cards there are and how many buffers there are and how many display modes there are, and then grab those rendered frames out. So it was largely to get gamers to have high speed graphics capturing. Things like OBS, the Open Broadcasting Studio, use it. So I would guess when you upgraded to DXGI, you're going to see, or you have seen, huge performance improvements, like gamer level speed.
Yeah, no, we and WebRTC, because it supports screen sharing typically in your browser, it has its own implementation of this stuff, and we were using that initially, but eventually we ended up implementing our own version of the DXGI API and just like squeezing out. I think we were like averaging 50, 60 milliseconds to like capture that screen and get it to the encoder to send over the network. And I think we saved like 20 or 25 extra milliseconds by implementing it ourselves and like using a threading model that made sense with WebRTC. So, it takes work, but that's what we like to do. That's the fun part.
So App Veil, Veil, veils, puts a veil over, sensitive apps. Like you might have, QuickBooks or something, and you're sharing your screen. You don't want someone to accidentally see your QuickBooks. If you're grabbing the pixels as they get all the way out onto the graphics card, and we're really, really close to the glass of the monitor at this point,
Mm-hmm.
how would you then cover something up that had sensitive information, like a social security number or a window that contained sensitive information, if it's so close to the glass?
Yeah, I asked the same question like when we first had this. We added this feature to Mac OS, and I was just thinking, I have no idea how we're going to do this on Windows. But I did some research and I found out that Windows actually has some built-in support for this. So they have a concept of you could maybe say secure windows, or like windows that should not be shown when you're capturing your screen. And you can have two behaviors. You can either have the window show up as a black box when it's captured by the screen, or you can have it just completely gone so you can see what's behind it. But the problem with that was only the process that creates the window is allowed to change that attribute. So somebody online on GitHub had some project that I found, and what they would do is they would use the classic DLL injection. So I don't know if you're familiar with DLL injection, but it's super interesting if you ever like look into it. But there just happens to be like some APIs. Which one is it? Like create thread happens to have the same signature as like load library. So like you can execute this, like you can load like the DLL that loads DLLs. The function off the top of my head is like it might be load DLL. I can't remember, or load
So
library.
there's load library. There's load library A, load library W, depending on width, and then create remote thread.
You use a create remote thread, and then you map in a bit of the remote process's memory, put the DLL name that you want in that memory, and then call load library on the remote process. So with all that, you can just basically inject arbitrary code into the remote process. So this was the project that I found that did this, and this is not how Tuple ended up doing it, but it was like, okay, so we can change these windows in other processes using this injection method. Luckily, we didn't have to do like such a hacky implementation. We ended up using what are called Windows hooks. And this also solved the second problem, which was once we get that window and we were able to like turn it invisible or turn it black, we need a way to be able to have a window behind it or alongside of it that shows it's being veiled. And so what we ended up doing was, since we're hooking into the window, we get all the window messages for every single window on the system. And we can see, okay, hey, they're about to show a window. Is this a window we want to veil? Okay, let's set that window attribute to make sure it's not visible in screen capture. So that there's basically, it should be impossible if it's correct to ever get a window inside the screen capture using this method. And our window that we put behind to show that it's being veiled. And this also gets captured so the remote user knows also that there's a window there being veiled. It completely stays in sync. When you change the size, there's no like lag that the veil border like.
Right. Yeah. You would imagine if you moved the thing really fast, or if you resize it really fast, maybe you'd see a peak of something. You're saying it's literally not possible by virtue of the way the pipeline works. There's not a, I'm moving this and then I cover it.
Exactly.
It's happening in a different order. And it's worth calling out that, of course, if people are listening and they're thinking, well, DLL injection is, a bad thing. You could do malicious things like steal data. Absolutely, you could. But it's also used every day for very legitimate reasons, like debugging. Like if you're using a debugger, you're using DLL injection. The fact that you didn't use that and instead went with window hooks is great. The window hook for things like WM keyboard or WM paint, like those are normal window messages. You're basically saying, I want to hear about everything you do so I can get my chance to have something to be said about it. It sounds like a very compatible way to do things.
Yeah. It's. I think it would be compatible, back to Windows 98, something crazy.
So what is the relationship between AppVeil and Tuple, though? Like, is AppVeil just a thing you wanted to make, or does AppVeil part of Tuple so that if I'm sharing my screen and I'm doing pair programming, I don't accidentally give away information that I don't want to show?
Yeah, exactly. It's just a feature within Tuple. I've never thought about like making AppVeil its own thing, but that could be a thing.
Like you could put it, one suggestion, if I could be so bold, is you could put it into Windows Power Toys.
Yeah, you totally could.
Right? Like call the Power Toys folks, let them know that this would be a really cool thing, and then everyone would get to use that. And that's kind of a living advertisement for whatever else y'all are doing. So, there's lots of companies that have like their main thing, and then they have the little sysinternals utilities that they give out to the people.
Yeah, that's something to consider for sure.
Now, was that done in C++ as well, or did you use something like Zig or another kind of language like Rust that can talk to Win32 APIs?
Yeah, so that's interesting because a big part of AppVeil is actually written in Zig, and there's a technical reason for that. The way a window hook works is it works actually similarly to DLL injection.
Mm-hmm.
You basically make a DLL, and then that DLL gets loaded through the OS into the processes that when the hook needs to run. So the DLL itself is written in Zig, and by doing that, we don't have to link in libc. And I think nowadays when you try to link in libc, it adds about like 2 megabytes to the binary. So I think like in the end, it ends up being like a couple hundred kilobytes, and so that's kind of a big percentage in change just by writing it in the C or C++ language. You have to add 2 megabytes to every single binary.
Oh wow!
So.
Well, and that's just unnecessary. You don't want the overhead.
Yeah, I mean, like most programs don't use most of what's in libc. Especially if you're a small program, right? You're probably like using a handful of functions. But you have to take the whole entire C library and link it to. There might be like linker optimizers that can like tree shake out and get it to be smaller, but.
Now, did you tell when you worked at Tuple? Did you say, we're doing this in Zig, and they might say that's a weird, obscure language that's not C. You shouldn't do that. Or does leadership just go, hey, cool, knock yourself out. I've never heard of that language. Enjoy.
It's actually funny because I do a lot of work on GitHub, and I made a project called ZigUp, which is one of the main version managers for Zig. And so the CTO at the time, his name's Spencer, starred my project, and that's how I learned about Tuple. Is I checked out it. Oh, it's guy's a CTO. What's his company? And I watched the pitch for Tuple and was immediately like, oh, these are my kind of people. Like they care about performance. Like okay, let me see if they're looking for anybody, and they were looking for a Linux guy, so I got hired as the Linux guy after that. And so the guy knew that I was a Zig person, and I do try to like sneak Zig in where I can. And I think at this point, it's not like, it's not mainly written in Zig, but there's definitely a lot of tentacles that Zig has. A lot of the build system is using cool things from Zig, and like this DLL, and our installer is written in Zig because it has the exact same problem. Our installer is like 12 megabytes. And so just writing it in C, this few hundred lines program would make it 14 megabytes. So that's like a, 20% increase in the size just for writing it in C. So, but I really enjoy Zig. I think it's a great language, and I want to do more of it. So
two things I want to say. One is just a shout out to like the Zig friends. I want to make sure that no one comes for me in the comments, because when I say Zig is this weird little, obscure language, there's all these languages like Erlang and Zig where people are doing interesting, delightful work. But like the dark matter developer that like is just working at the IT department of like some random company may not have ever heard of Zig. Like if you're not the Hacker News crowd, you've never heard of it. But it is a zero dependency drop in C++ compiler. It does cross compilation out of the box. It's tiny. And I think I told you when we met the first time that like I would have bet incorrectly. Like when the Zig fellas had the idea, I was like, this kid, God bless him. You know what I mean? I would have not, quote unquote, invested time or emotion. And I would have said, this is one of those hobby things. But gosh darn it, if they haven't built a big old community, it's a simple language. It's fast as heck, which brings me to my comment. I thought it's funny that you're like, yeah, this would be 2 megs and that would be 12. And I'm like, I know websites with bigger PNGs than that. And they're like, okay, shipping that website. Like I go to websites now, you go to like The Verge, you hit F12 and you're like, that's a 25 meg website. But you're shipping executables that do 10 times more in half the size.
Yeah, I just downloaded the software for this microphone, 500 megabyte download to like control the lights.
500 megs to have the microphone for the podcast. Thank you for your sacrifice. But shout out to Zig. I need to get some Zig folks on the show, because like these are the delightful things that are happening and what makes open source happen. And the fact that it's so well compatible with C and C++, it's just Rust and Zig are really doing interesting things right now, I think, in the space.
Yeah, I just did a podcast with and I hooked up, the last guy I did a podcast with Loris. So Loris is the VP community of Zig. So I can totally hook you guys up.
Yeah, that'd be fun. So writing native Windows apps, it's 2025. You banged it out in C++ with a little bit of Zig. It's a dying art, but you're getting things down into the milliseconds now. How do you even debug that? Like, how do you squeeze out 20 milliseconds? Are you unit testing? Do you have an automated testing suite at the higher level? Like, where did you find those milliseconds?
I think I'm going to give you an answer you may not expect. I'm a big fan of like in the handmade community. I don't. So some people may have heard of this, but it's Casey Muratori, kind of inspired by his stream, and he gives a really good talk on this subject. And to summarize it, he just says basically, write code that doesn't suck. Like write code that's. I mean, that's basically the gist of what he's saying. But like, if like
get good is what you're saying.
It's a skill issue, maybe, but
it's a skill issue. I'm saying that as someone who's like losing to Silk Song right now, and everyone on the line is like, "Get good, poser."
Yeah, exactly right. But I'll tell you, I do have a really good profiler. It's called Superluminal. It's just, you just install it, and with any program, you can just run it. It gives you like symbols, full profile of everything. It's amazing. I've only had to use it a handful of times. And it's usually just to like find out, okay, is this like are we going to be better off using this GDI thing or this DirectX thing or something? Like really high level, like what's the right approach to doing this? Or like, should we be caching this sort of object? But like I said, I've only used it a handful of times. In general, though, after you've been programming for 15 years, as much programming as I've done in that time as well, you just kind of like learn like these are the things that you should do, these are the things that you shouldn't do, and now it's just you don't really have to spend a lot of time thinking about performance if you just write code a certain way, I guess. But
Interesting.
you do have to learn. There's a lot of
So,
time.
just for context, Casey Muratori had a project called Handmade Hero,
Yeah.
and the idea was, this daily source code archives, and you can still buy these if you go to computerenhanced.com or mollyrocket.com. But the idea was write a thing from scratch. Like I've talked about this on the podcast before, the idea of learn to drive stick shift, and it's a little bit, I would argue it's a little gatekeepy, because like we're at a time now where you could build a Call of Duty clone in Unity and like, hello world is I'm already walking around in a 3D world. So like in a moment where we have like Uber, where you're just like, yeah, a guy just picks me up and drove me over there. Other people are like, I'm going to do it in Pico 8 and I'm going to do it in 4K. And like, I'm going to make a 3D engine from scratch and I'm going to read the Doom source code. It's very interesting to see who is choosing to use these tools and go that way and who is choosing to do it from scratch. And I think there's value in both, depending on what you're trying to accomplish.
Oh, for sure. For sure. Yeah. This is definitely the approach where you're making like I said, like Tuple, right? It's for developers. We care about this stuff.
Yeah.
And it's funny you mentioned the Doom stuff. Casey Muratori also, speaking of, since you're from Microsoft, did you ever follow the like controversy that happened with him and the Windows terminal?
Oh, was he the guy who
Yes.
was salty and he did the whole back and forth with the terminal people and they said such and such a thing is not possible? And he's like, yeah, it is. And then he went off and did it. And then they had a little back and forth.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah,
So,
I remember that. I didn't recognize that was the same person. I probably would have handled that with a different tone of voice. But that is an interesting thing when it's always fun when you're doing open source to say, I don't think this is possible. And then that's called nerd sniping. Have you ever been nerd sniped?
I'm fall victim to that all the time.
Right. So nerd sniping is when you tell a programmer something is not possible.
Yeah.
And then they can't function and they stop everything and they go off and they go, I must quit my job and solve problem, right? So you got nerd sniped when someone told you to make AppVeil and then you went and did it. And yeah, I didn't realize that was the same person.
Yeah, yeah. In fact, I took his source code. He wrote a terminal and published it. And I don't know if you're familiar with Ghosty and Mitchell Hashimoto's project. Yeah. So I contributed a Windows port to Ghosty.
Oh, wow.
And
that's very generous of you.
I have the Stockholm syndrome with Windows, and now I like find it fun to like add Windows support. I just got a native Win32 backend merged into Raylib, for example, too, as well. But yeah, for some reason,
I think Windows gets a bad name. Like I like Windows. Like I'm non-denominational. I've got a Mac sitting like right here that's updating. I've got I use WSL. I do all of my development for websites in containers in WSL. But I literally enjoy Windows. I don't have Stockholm syndrome. I enjoy it. So I kind of reject that phrasing.
I have definitely come to appreciate the design of Windows. I'm very impressed with the whole way that the windowing system works, the messaging system. I think like I've heard the term thrown around like actor pattern, but like I said, I think it's just Stockholm syndrome, but maybe it's actually legitimately good. But at first it seems like overly complicated. But when you realize all the benefits of it, the way they did the windowing system, I think is probably genius and probably.
Well, I think one of the things that Windows doesn't get credit for, and I would also shout out to Tuple for working like on older versions of Windows, is we don't get credit for compatibility. Like my favorite laptop is an ARM laptop, and I can run x64, I can run x86. I did not notice when I moved to ARM, other than it got cooler and the battery life got more. And on my x64 machine that I'm on right now, if I want to run like DOSBox X and I want to run VisiCalc from 1977, it still runs. But I've got a Mac that's a Mac Pro, and I tried to upgrade it to Mac 26, and it was like, nope, sorry, bud, you're on
I love
Tahoe
that.
for the rest of your life.
You can take a binary that was compiled in the early 90s and run it on modern Windows. Like
Exactly.
that's insane.
There's an entire like application compatibility layer, talk about DLL injection, where Windows notices you're trying to call old APIs, and like you can still run Microsoft Money 95, and it'll be like, oh, he's going to call that. I'm going to redirect him over there, and it will work. So like shout out to App Compat people for making that happen.
Yeah, that's definitely one big benefit that Windows and other platforms are suffering because they don't have that compatibility. I think that could be a big reason why, Linux never has such a struggle, like taking up more of the market, because they don't have that backward compatibility. Linus himself, Linus Torvalds, he makes a Scuba software, and he does not distribute binaries for Linux. He distributes binaries for Windows and Mac OS because it's too damn hard.
Well, look at how games work. Like I'm gesturing to my right where my Steam Deck is, and the geniuses that work on things like Proton to make like most of the games that are running on Steam Deck, which is Linux, are compiled for Windows. And there's that legendary blog post that says that the only reliable Linux API is the Windows API, right? If you want your app to run great on Linux, write it to the Windows API, which like Win32 is forever. God help us.
Gosh, that's hilarious. We've thought about too, like, hey, we should work on Linux again. Can we just take the Windows app and run it on Linux? Maybe that's how we just
maybe, right? Like, there's a lot of cool stuff going on.
Yeah, I think we need to change a couple more things in the app. But yeah, that potentially, like, I'm kind of half joking about that. So
yeah. Well, people can find Tuple at tuple.app online. Where can they find you? Presumably on GitHub.
Yeah, I have like a 4-letter, but it's Marler 8997 is my username on GitHub, and other various places.
Yeah, if you just put in Marler 8997, you go immediately to Johnny's World on GitHub, where you can go and see ZigUp and AnyZig and all the fun stuff that you're working on. That is a very green GitHub graph. You should be very proud of your work.
Oh, thank you.
Are you Googling yourself right now? This is great to end on.
Yeah.
I'm going to end the podcast on Johnny is Googling himself just to confirm that he can find his stuff.
I can, yeah.
Fantastic. Well, thanks so much for spending time with me today. This has been another episode of Hanselminutes, and we'll see you again next week.